Okay, I think we can start. Welcome everyone to this third Nordic Placemaking Talk dedicated to a child-friendly city. Before we start, I would just like to take a minute to share some childhood memories with you, and I would very much like to invite you to do the same. Please reflect on the souvenirs that you keep from that time and the environment where you grew up in. I grew up in a suburban city, but our apartment was very much located in the center, so we were close to a lot of amenities and public facilities. When I think about this place today, what I remember is all the journeys I did by foot to go to school, especially. I remember passing by a lot of the stores on my way to school and also stopping on my way back to say hi to the shop owners. I especially remember the electronics store by my home. And I can't recall the name of the person who owned it, but I remember very well the smell of that place, the warm metallic smell of the engines that were running and all the colorful lights and wires that were there. I was the older sister, so I took a lot of pride in going places on my own, as much as it was also time for myself away from my little sisters. Another important place for me at that time was the public library. I would go there every Saturday morning to read comic book when my parents were doing the home chores, grocery shopping and cleaning up our apartment. When we were preparing this session with both speakers, we talked a lot about the importance of these memories to remind us of what brought us joy or discomfort as a child. And that brings me to the webinar of today and this webinar series that we started in the fall with LINK Arkitektur and Tryggare Sverige and us at Future Place Leadership to share knowledge on how to develop our public spaces and better understand how people live and move through cities today. During the spring, we wanted to focus on children and youth. And after 2 episodes on children's participation and how to include children in the planning process, we would like today to focus on the physical environment and designing with and for children. And I would like to welcome Petra from LINK Arkitektur, who's going to moderate the event with me.
Thank you. I will then introduce you, Elise Perrault from Future Place Leadership as well. Today we will hear about Tim Gill, who is an independent researcher and also author of the book Urban Playground with the subtitle How Child-Friendly Planning and Design Can Save Cities. And after that, we will hear from Pia Møllenhus, who leads our landscape architects at LINK Arkitektur, and she will talk about a practical example of how to design with and for children from the Torslanda school in Gothenburg. And lastly, there will be time for a discussion, and Tim and Pia will answer your questions. And please start posing questions already now during their presentations while you remember what you're wondering about. And when you do, please use the Q&A function because it's much easier for us to keep track of the questions then. But also use the chat and comment and share your childhood memories, etc. And about 10 minutes to 1, we will end the webinar. And now I'm so looking forward to hear from you, Tim, to talk about how to design child-friendly cities.
Thank you very much, Petra. Let me just share my screen and then we can start. Oh, that's not the beginning. Let's go back to the beginning. Thank you. And yes, I will be sharing really a quick tour of my book. And I want to pick up on the introduction and Elise's invitation to think about our own childhoods, because I think when we're thinking about children today, it's a good place to start. And so, like many of you, I had quite a free childhood. I shared some memories in the chat. And of course, things are different for children today. And this map, which is the first figure in my book, shows what I call the shrinking horizons of childhood. So this shows you the roaming range or the home territory of 4 children. They're all aged 8 years old, but they're in 4 generations of the same family who all lived in the same city. And you can see how their roaming range shrinks. It's the big blob that takes up most of the map is the roaming range of the great-grandfather. And it shrinks down to this little yellow dot here, which is the roaming range of the sun. And I'm glad to share with you a similar story from Sweden. So this is from the town of Sollefteå, and exactly the same story. So what we see here is what I call the shrinking horizons of childhood. And I think it's one of the most important and one of the most underexplored changes in the nature of childhood. Of course, we cannot turn the clock back, but I think what we can do is this prompts us adults to think about what are the good ingredients of a good childhood. And that one of these ingredients, I think, is having that opportunity to gradually explore and discover and get to know the people and the places around us. So this is what I will be talking about. I'm going to say a bit more about what I think a child-friendly place is, why I think this idea matters, why I do think it can save cities, and a few thoughts on making it happen. And my book and this talk is drawing a lot on studies of about 12 cities in different parts of the world, different sizes, different contexts. But these are all cities that have taken seriously the idea of making their built fabric, their urban form, more child-friendly, and the lessons that we can learn from those cities. First, I better talk about what I mean by child-friendly planning. And I'm going to start with some ideas from the urban planner Brent Toderian. He used to be the chief planner in Vancouver, in Canada. And he really talks about 3 pillars that make for a family-friendly neighborhood. And first is housing, of course. If you don't have housing for families, a neighborhood will not have families. But you also need good services, schools, childcare, and so on. But it's this 3rd pillar, the public realm, the parks, the spaces, the streets, that I'm most interested in, and that my book focuses on, because this is where children stop being just members of the family or school children, and they start to become citizens and explore and get to know and stake their claim as full members of society. So I argue that child-friendly planning really has 2 dimensions, and this is captured in this diagram, which is based, by the way, on the work of the Finnish academic Marketa Kytö, who's based at Aalto University. And in one dimension, a place is child-friendly if indeed there's lots of choice of things to do. There are playgrounds, there are parks, there is nature, sport facilities, and so on. But that is only one dimension. You also need the 2nd dimension, which is children's mobility. How easy is it for children to get around that neighborhood or place? And it's only where you have both a lot of offers, a lot of things to do, and high levels of mobility that you'll have the child-friendly city, this quadrant here. And that definition runs through my book. So to take 2 examples from 2 cities, in Oslo, I was interested to discover and find out more about a program to improve the mobility of children. And this actually used a mobile phone app called the Traffic Agent to allow children to tell the municipality where they had problems on their local trips, especially the trip to school. And the municipality had a team who acted on this information. So it's clearly aimed to make it easier for children to walk and cycle. And then by contrast, this is several parks and public spaces in Malmö in Sweden, which is well known for its program to create a whole series of destination play spaces across the city. So if you like, these 2 cities give a flavor of the two different dimensions. But I'm interested in cities that are doing both at the same time. So I'm going to share with you now what I call in my book the ultimate child-friendly neighborhood. And this is the neighborhood of Vauban in Freiburg in Germany. It's very well known amongst sustainable urbanists. And you can see a view from up high, but also when you get down to street level, a feeling of what the place is like. And the key feature of this medium density neighborhood is that it is practically car-free. So very few people own a car in this district, about 5,500 people. And if you do own a car, you have to park it in one of some peripheral car parks on the edge So the whole of the space between the buildings is available for social use, for play, and it's green, it's attractive. There you can see the car park, you can see a great public transport linking this district to the center of the city. So as I say, all of the space between the buildings is lively, it's welcoming, it's green. And I've visited this district twice, and on both occasions, I've seen a lot of evidence of people playing, children of different ages with and without their parents. And so a real sense of the public life of this district being lived to the full because of all the space that's available. And here's a nice image of one of the streets. So I took some of the ideas from Vauban and distilled it into a kind of schematic, a diagram that tried to pull together what I thought were the key design ingredients of a child-friendly place. I'm not going to read them out now. You can look at them later, but you'll see some of the themes that I'm talking about. And the second city that I want to talk about to illustrate this idea of child-friendliness is Rotterdam. Two interesting things about Rotterdam. One is that if you like, it retrofitted some ideas and interventions into an existing part of the city. But the most interesting thing about Rotterdam is, why was it putting millions of euros into becoming more child-friendly? And the answer was that 15 years ago, a survey showed that the city was the worst place in the Netherlands to bring up a child. And the city's leaders realized that that was a problem. So they took a comprehensive approach and piloted a fine-grained set of changes in neighborhoods to make them more child-friendly. You can see a map illustrating some changes here. Changes to schoolyards, to public play areas, open spaces, the pavements in the streets, play areas, sports facilities, all coming together to allow both more choice for children and greater mobility. And this program did indeed help to bring families into the neighborhoods that were being targeted. So that begins to tell the story of why I think this idea matters. And when I looked at the different cities, what I found was that there were three clusters of ideas. There was cities that were interested indeed in economy and demography, like Rotterdam, cities interested in sustainability, and especially the idea that a child-friendly place looks and feels like a sustainable place. And then a third group of cities that had a strong focus on children's rights, children's health and well-being. But the interesting thing here was that I found many cities saw win-wins. They saw that you could address sustainability and child health, or economy and sustainability, so that you could see these win-wins by supporting a more child-friendly approach. So, say a bit more about children's rights. One of the things that's very clear is that when we ask children themselves what they like and don't like about cities, the answers that they give really map very closely onto those two dimensions of place and mobility that I talked about earlier. We also find that, of course, one of the biggest challenges, one of the things that makes places unfriendly to children is the dominance of traffic. And it really is still striking how the adverse impact of high levels of traffic and poor planning for traffic on children's lives. Right now, traffic danger is the biggest killer of children and young people around the world. Even in a country like Sweden, it is a major killer of children over the age of, I can't quite see that, I think it's over 9. And so over 5, I'm sorry. And there is a strong social gradient here as well, with poorer children much more likely to suffer the ill effects. So if you pull all this together, this question of why child friendliness matters, I think you get something like this quote that's very famous now in urban circles from the former mayor of Bogota, that children are indeed a kind of indicator species. And as we saw in Vauban, if you create a neighborhood where there are children active and visible of different ages, with and without their parents, that's a sign of the health of that neighborhood. So how do we make all this happen? I argue in my book that the challenges we face here are not technical challenges. They are moral and political challenges. They are really about opening up the question of who and what cities and neighborhoods are for, and of having different priorities. I think it's crucial for cities that take this idea seriously to have the right people in place as well as the right policies. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. But I also recognize in my book that this is a new and emerging idea, this idea of child friendliness. And so really people who want to contribute to making cities more child friendly, we have to be opportunistic. We have to see where there are changes happening, where there is momentum, where there is money, and to harness that energy. But I also argue that cities are facing many challenges, and that one of the strongest features of the cities that I looked at was that they could see that thinking more about children, that bringing in children's voices, helped to be a kind of unifying lens and to find a way through the complexities of making changes in cities, especially changes that we know we're going to have to make in the light of global warming. I'm sorry, that's my phone ringing. Thankfully, it's stopping now. So just a flavor here of that moral and political challenge. You can see this tweet illustrates beautifully that if we want to open up spaces in neighborhoods for children, it's really not very difficult. We can just stop the traffic and children will come out and play. So then that becomes a political question about who and what streets are for. Turning to the mechanisms. One more point about values and understandings. I'm very encouraged to see a global debate now about risk, and particularly the overprotection of children when it comes to place-based design. It's a topic that I've long had an interest in, and I think there is a real sign of a more balanced approach. But that too, of course, come down largely to questions about values rather than about technical issues. So at the municipal level, my book has a strong focus on the municipality. I argued that the cities that are doing the most have a municipal focus. They have, there's a model of change. And at the heart of this model, the hub of this hub and spoke model is a municipal official, somebody whose job it is to make things happen, ideally supported by a politician. And that official or team links both to planning and transport, has guidance on effective involvement, has a focus on neighborhoods, especially residential neighborhoods where families spend most of their lives, looks at both aspects, both dimensions of child friendliness, and also looks to measure the impact of what they're doing. And then turning to opportunism and taking the most of the opportunities that come along. I saw a good example of this in the city of Ghent in Flanders, where there was a major regeneration program going on in one disadvantaged part of the city. And the city saw the opportunity to add a child-friendly layer to this regeneration work, to connect up green spaces, to open up new public space, to improve walking and cycling, and thread that child-friendly layer into the regeneration project that was already taking place. So my closing appeal to you is to invite you to see a children's lens as being a powerful way to promote and bring forward progressive discussion about the changes that we need to make in cities. And my final quote is from the Norwegian researcher Gro Sandkjær Hansen, who told me when I visited that city that really bringing child-friendly notions helps to sugar the pill, she says, for the changes that we know we're going to need to make in cities. If it's better for children, it's more accepted in public debate, and it's also better for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tim. It was really interesting hearing you. I think it gives such a good overview of the extent we can work with child-friendly cities and how multidimensional the question is. I just would like to start with a question of my own, and then we can take a question from the chat. Please post them here, and we can take either them now or later during the discussion at the end. My first question is regards your book. I know you've been traveling a lot in different cities to write that book, and I was wondering, what do you look at when you go to these different cities to assess the child friendliness of the environment? What are the different indicators and fields that we can look at?
Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, I want to see some projects. I want to see the difference that schemes are making on the ground. I want to get a sense of the scale of these, because I think now there are lots of examples of one-off projects. But what interests me is how can this go to scale? Yes, so that we don't just have a few lighthouse schemes but the rest of the city is not changed at all. How can we make a change, make the case for large-scale change? So I also wanted to speak to the senior officers, the politicians, the campaigners, to get a sense of the momentum behind these changes and how they can be lifted and made a strategic driver for change in a city. Okay, yeah. So also the strategic and the policy framework, I guess, in place. The question from Denise is about having the right people in place to make a city child-friendly. Who are these people? What roles are they in? And how can we influence them to think in a child-friendly way? It's a really good question. I would say the people I could see in the different cities that I visited, some were urban designers, some had a background in playgrounds, some were social pedagogues, some were transport people. But all of them, they had a passion, you know, they had a drive and an energy to get things to happen. There was a kind of entrepreneurial quality almost, like they were catalysts. And so they were able to look beyond their own narrow, maybe team or function, and to start to make those connections, with housing, with regeneration, with transport, and to show through rolling up their sleeves and getting involved in projects the difference that a child-friendly lens could make. And even better if they started to get support from elected politicians, of course. And in one city in Tirana, the capital city of Albania, it was really striking to see the energy that came because of the mayor himself, Erion Veliaj, making that strong case for children. I think, so it's more about the personality and them being an effective navigator, an effective worker within a bureaucracy than them having any particular background or training.
Right, thank you so much. We're going to continue a little bit, and before we introduce Anna-Pia, we would like to know how child-friendly your neighborhoods are. I mean, all of you who's listening. So please tell us, would you let a little child go out and play alone in your neighborhood? And fill in the poll, and we are so much looking forward to see what it's like for you guys. So how are we doing, Elise? Are we getting any answers? Yeah, we have 60%. 60% answers. Okay, come on, everyone. We want at least 90%, I think. Yeah, 75. 75 and counting. Okay. Yeah. And how are we doing now? 80. I'm just going to introduce the next speaker in the meantime, and then we can show the results. Because I think you finished your presentation, Tim, by talking a lot about nature and also children as a unifying lens, and I think that's very much what our next speakers works with, the role of nature in building good environments for children. So our next speaker is Anna-Pia. She's a landscape architect at LINK Arkitektur, and she's going to talk about the best schoolyard when it rains, a schoolyard in the city of Gothenburg. Okay, now I have 90% votes, so I think I'm going to end polling, and then we can move on to Anna-Pia.
Okay, I will start by sharing, or do you want to show the poll? Okay.
I'm sharing the results now. So we have 61% that says that yes, they would let their young child play alone outside, and 40% that say no. Do you have any comments or reflections on that, team or Anna-Pia?
Of course, it's difficult to answer the question without a little bit more of a sense of what young means.
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe under 6, and I know from studies that in many, in almost everywhere in the UK, you will not see children under 6 out on their own. In Switzerland, it's very different. It's not so unusual. So I think it's a good question to ask, to bring out those debates about what is it about different neighborhoods and also different cultures, because there are cultural factors as well. Yeah, I'm not surprised to see the mix in the answers.
Thank you.
Would you want to comment as well, Anna-Pia?
No, I just, it's a little bit sad actually to think about that 40% said no, because I didn't share my childhood experience, but I am one of those who grew up in the coast, on the seashore, and could just, you know, roam freely around. I run along the shore, stepping on stones or climbing in trees, or I just had it really, you know, free. So for me, that's a really important part of being a child, is to be able to explore without being monitored or supervised all the time.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Anna-Pia. You can share your screen now.
I will share my screen. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it works.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for having me and to invite me to do this little talk about the schoolyard. And I'm going to talk a little bit about design principles for gender neutral and including design. And I have 3 children myself, and I have reflected upon the fact that children, at least here in Norway, and that's the smallest one, may spend as much as 9.5 hours at school, which makes the schoolyard one of the most important social arenas for our children. Let's see if we can make this work. Tim, you were also showing a little bit about this. The fact is that research documents, of course, the importance of play for our children, for how they develop their social skills, but also it has affection on learning abilities. And even though we have a lot of research that clearly states that these pre-programmed or manufactured climbing equipment is not the best place for imaginative play, we still supply our schoolyards and urban playgrounds with these kind of design. We do know that studies show that the pre-programmed playgrounds with the loose parts, they don't facilitate this spontaneous and creative play in the same way as a natural environment does. And also the physical environment affects the social dynamics among children. This is a fact that we know. Therefore, I have been engaged in a focus on the need to apply design principles that aim to help challenge social patterns and hierarchies that occur at the school, and how we choose to design these physical surroundings has a great influence in our children's everyday life. Okay, so sorry. Here we go. So if children can decide, and if we ask them what they want their school to be, then what would they say? And actually there is not too many reports that really has gathered information from asking the children directly themselves. But this foundation in Norway called the Change Factory has done that over quite a few years and have been asking more than 5,000 children since 2008. what they would like, or what is the most important things in order to want to learn at school. And two of the main takeaways was safety, which is a basic need for all of us, regardless. And secondly, also not very surprisingly, the feeling of belonging and inclusion. And these takeaways are important to remember. So for the practical example that Elise was introducing for me to speak about, we have been involved in designing a school in Gothenburg. We won a design competition with the main aim to create the best school in the world when it rains, which is, for a landscape architect, this is a dream. And the main scope of the design was to create a pilot project for stormwater management. And we have a very elaborate stormwater concept, which strengthens ecological dimensions, and water is used very playfully, and it can also be a very important educational resource. Now, I don't have time to go more into this concept design for the stormwater management, but what I would like to talk about is the fact that as the project moved along, another scope became really important, and this was the fact that they wanted, or the city of Gothenburg wanted this project also to be a pilot project for an inclusive and gender-neutral school. And the question is, what does it really mean? and these are the Swedish words are jämlikhet and jämställdhet. I even have troubles translating this to good Norwegian words, but the main takeaway is that the design should not be limited to stereotypic gender patterns, but offer equal opportunities. And the design should also supply equal conditions regardless of ethnicity, personalities, socioeconomic conditions, like where you come from, disabilities and preferences, and so on. And I think this is a really exciting theme to work with. It really, me as a designer, this really challenges me. How can you make this into a physical, concrete design that works? Now you can see this is the site plan from the competition, and it's not so easy to see maybe all the details here, and it's since been elaborated and into detailed design. But we can have a look about how we developed the details. And what was important for us quite early in the process was to develop a 3D digital model and to invite the children to join for a 3D virtual walk into the new schoolyard. And children are so, they are just so natural with all the technology, so they just grasped the VR and walked around, just like being part of a game, I suppose. And as they walked around in the schoolyard, they gave us really valuable feedback on the design that was there. But at the same time also, which was a really important for us, was that they would reflect upon the existing schoolyards that they had. So they would relate to this, and they would give us feedback on what they liked and what they didn't like. For instance, they would say that I don't like this big gravel path, for instance, or they could say that we feel it's really scary where the bikes are, or they could also come with nice ideas like it's not one of the things I have written here, but some of the children were really into having places where they could hide from the teachers. so they wouldn't be supervised all the time. So, and another design principle, this is quite well known, but it's implemented into the as general design principles in Gothenburg already. But it's the principles of zoning, and the zoning provides different possibilities for different kinds of activities. And now we have the four different kinds here, the zones that they like to work with. But what was really important for us was not the zones themselves, but to create overlaps and mix and flex and blur, so that you can add several layers of meaning to the outdoor areas, making them a little bit more complex, but also providing much more access, which also has effects on how safe and secure you feel. And also we know that these more complex designs appeals to girls, for instance. And also we work with this concept called on stage, off stage, backstage, where you kind of view the surroundings as a stage that provides different kinds of possibilities. And by using this design principle, you can create places where people can be in the center of attention, being watched, or where they can withdraw a little bit so that they can still participate but not be so active, or also where you can withdraw totally, to be backstage alone, do your thing, practice without anyone watching you, or like in a small group doing your thing. And these are really practical and easy in use principles, I think. So about these zones, just a few more points about each of these well, three most important zones. Of course, the open and fast-paced zone is designed for physical activity, and to facilitate inclusion and gender neutrality, it's really important to think about flexible multi-purpose equipment and environments that facilitates imaginative play and an organized play, because an organized play, it kind of creates ripples on water, that the more children develop their imagination, the more games of their own they will invent. And also we see other benefits from this, the fact that it facilitates more play between boys and girls, and also between different age groups, and between children that doesn't usually play together. So it has many positive effects, thinking this way. Now, the calm and creative zone is, of course, for the social activities. And really the most important thing here is to remember to create variation. That's the most important takeaway. And then to sum up the most important area, I think it's the wild and nature-like zone for creative play and restoration. Because it's important to remember that nature is actually in itself gender neutral. It's really fantastic, I think. And nature facilitates more imaginative play, and it promotes exploration. But it's also important to remember that nature fosters restoration from mental fatigue. It's like a real break from the focused attention that you have in the classroom when you have to concentrate all the time. And we have a lot of research that tells us that time spent in green places also it lowers the symptoms of inattention, also for children with challenges such as ADHD. And it has also an effect that it lowers problems and conflicts, probably because it facilitates more imaginative plays and not pre-programmed plays. So I think that I will sum up and say that if you were to just take away a few things from today, maybe that's the thing, to remember the benefits of including enough real nature in our schoolyards, but in our urban playgrounds, as well as everyday life in the city. Because you can say that nature is the mother of inclusiveness and has no gender. And it helps, to restore ability to focus and concentrate and learn. It lowers conflicts, and also the extra effect is that it's sustainable and necessary to promote biodiversity and climate adaptation in our urban areas. So it has even more benefits than just learning. So I think that's what I have time to talk about now today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anna-Pia. Really interesting and a very nice project. I think it's interesting that you talk about the importance of nature. As the Swedes here are aware of, it's been quite a big debate in Sweden that we build so dense cities that there's really no verdure and there's no place for kids to play. So I think it's important that you actually lift this issue. And now we will take some questions from the audience and maybe one or two questions from Elise and me as well. So I'm starting with this question, which I think could possibly both be to Anna-Pia and Tim. And Tim, would you like to start? How can we effectively involve children's voice and decisions in the planning of child-friendly cities? Are you aware of any creative methods to involve them in the co-design of playgrounds, community gardens, for example?
It's a really good question. And in my book, I argue that we need more understanding about what effective participation is. One of the things I've learned from this topic is there are many, many examples of children's participation, but a lot of them haven't really led to any great changes. There are, nice models being made or videos, but the big changes in cities don't take any account of children's views. So effective participation, I think, is about firstly capturing the reality of children's lives and what it's like for them to live in a neighborhood and the barriers that they face and the things they like and they don't like, and bringing those messages to the decision makers so that they will change what they do. I think that is the most important thing. And I think you can do that in lots of different creative ways. And in my book, I share some examples of different types of approaches to participation. And it will be different in a scheme, in a small community garden compared to a scheme with a big new development or a regeneration program. But capturing that, the insights of what it's like to be a child living in that area or in that city, and how the built environment shapes their lives. That's, I think, the most important thing we can do.
I think, Tim, you also talk about the difference of designing for children and with children.
Yes. So again, this is complicated, right? It's not easy to figure out how to get neighborhoods to be greener, to be more healthy. And I don't think we should expect children to have all the answers. So we are the grown-ups here. We have to take our responsibility for the decisions we make. And we can't pass on all that responsibility to children. So that's where we are designing with children, but also for children. And especially when we think about the changes we're going to have to make to reduce our carbon footprint, that is our job. And actually, the sooner we start doing that, the better for the next generation. So it's a really clear, I think, moral duty on us adults to start to have these difficult conversations, especially conversations about the role of the car and the dominance of the car in neighborhoods, where we shouldn't be asking children how to solve that problem. We should be coming up with solutions ourselves.
I can make also a comment on that, because in my everyday life, I work with more, concrete, like one-on-one projects. Of course, we'd like to do the master plans where you can really have an impact on a larger area. But I think what's a challenge and what we have to address is what happens when you get down to each and every project that's being built, because that's where a lot of decisions are made that is very negative also for children. You make, for instance, for me as a landscape architect, it's quite normal that the sketch plan, the leading or the design that you start with is quite green, but when it's built, most of the green has gone away because of argues of maintenance, for instance. So you get also it's the large perspective with where you have to involve politicians and where you have to think large scale, but I also see that the so more small scale decisions where you make decisions which is not good in the long run, and which is made by people who don't think about the children but about the maintenance budget, for instance.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to continue with another question, reflection on risk. And it wasn't a direct question to any of you, so maybe Anna Pia, you can start to explain maybe if you are taking into consideration this issue of risk, and how do we make sure that it's both riskful and interesting enough for children, so it's not, and at the same time that we take into consideration also parents' point of view on the safety of their children.
Oh, this is an ongoing discussion in all our projects, of course, and especially in the school projects. But there is also risks, you know, with the pre-manufactured playground equipment. But the thing is that with the natural environment, you don't really need to add so much extra. I mean, in itself, especially for this this creative play, you can play with small stones or with sticks or whatever, and I think most people will think that that's not very risky. As for introducing water, that's always a big discussion because of drowning, for instance, and also other health risks. So it's difficult, and it depends on the local school. Sometimes it's easy, and other times it's really not. And of course, we have to design surroundings which isn't too risky. But on the other hand, children need challenges to develop. So you kind of have to you have to follow the rules, but you also have to use your common sense. And I think what you started with, Elise, the fact that just to reflect a little bit around your own childhood and to kind of relate a little bit more personally to this, I think is really important, because sometimes I feel when we do these designs, we are a little bit too detached. I think we need to engage much more.
Okay. Yeah. I think we have time for one last question. Do you have one, Petra, or should I?
Well, I think it would be really nice just to hear Tim also comment on the idea of risk, because I think that's one of the main parts.
Yes, and I really agree with Anna Pia, the value of thinking about our own childhoods and the kind of places we enjoyed playing in when we were younger. And whenever I do workshops or talks about risk, and I do them a lot, I almost always start like you did in this session, by inviting the adults to think about the places we used to play when we were younger. And they are often really quite adventurous, wild, exciting places. And it helps us to make a connection with something about children that we know when we watch children, which is that children have an appetite for experience. Yeah, what's the one thing a children hates? It's being bored. Oh, I'm so bored. No, give me some stimulation. That's what children want. They want to go from what's boring to what's exciting. And so when we think about risk, we have to weigh up the risks and the benefits, and we have to take a balanced view. And that is not always easy, of course, but the beginning of the road to wisdom around risk is to recognize the benefits of risk, that giving children opportunities to have exciting adventures, to explore, to go outside of their comfort zone is really valuable, and that there are tools out there. I've shared in the chat a tool I've been closely associated with, a risk-benefit assessment process that helps designers, planners, educators get a good balance between the risks and the benefits. Because I think many of us feel that we have not got a good balance anymore. Now, that's not to say we just let children do what they like and we have no regard for their safety. I know that we have many people from Sweden in the audience, and in Sweden you have a very good record on child safety. But I think you also, as a culture, you have a strong belief in rules and norms and regulations. And I know when I come to Sweden, I find sometimes people say, "Oh no, we cannot bring in this feature because it's not allowed by the regulations." Well, you cannot regulate for everything. Yes, you have to give some room for uncertainty, for the learning that comes from uncertainty. You have to give children that freedom, but we also, as designers and educators, have to give ourselves that freedom to try new things.
Thank you for this last reflection on uncertainty. I think it's indeed very important, and it's also linked to the more general theme of this series, which is placemaking and good public spaces. And also both of you brought so many good insights on how child-friendly cities can help us achieve other important goals for our cities, like gender equality, inclusiveness, but protection of nature in our cities, and environmental transition. So it was really interesting to hear your insights and how you work. For the participants, we will now close the webinar. We'll have a last webinar on child-friendly cities in June, so keep your email open and on the lookout for the date. And we'll also share with you all the different tools and projects that both of our speakers have talked about today, and go through your questions and see if we can answer them as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for today. See you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.